You predicted that she would be humiliated, which is exactly how it seems. Absolutely no concessions from Donald Tusk and the EU. What on earth does she do now?
Well, I think what you saw last night was the complete failure of the British negotiating position laid bare. From the very start of this process, they have asked us for concessions at every single time we've met them. And the one time when the Prime Minister's in trouble and she wants to get something back, they just say no. So now they've basically trapped her into a deal, which in my opinion is the worst deal in history. And her prospects now of getting this through Parliament look to me to be about zero.
Do you have any sympathy for her here, Nigel?
No, because from the start it was clear. We said at the beginning nothing was agreed until everything's agreed. And what we've now done with this is we've agreed to give away somewhere between 40 and 60 billion sterling in return for a set of vague promises in the future, which this side don't have to honour. And we could find ourselves trapped inside the EU's customs union for 5, 10 or 15 years. No, this is an absolute failure. You know, the job of a leader is to work out the big picture. I'm afraid she's failed on every level. And she now, to get this through Parliament, she's either going to have to get the Labour Party to support this, and I mean, why should they help a government in trouble? Or she's going to have to make some very dire threats that if this deal doesn't go through, something awful will happen.
I mean, talking of promises, there are people that will argue that votes were made on vague promises for Brexit back in 2016 that just haven't appeared. You yourself have said that, you never thought it was going to be the case that we get that money for the NHS that was on all those buses and, on billboards and everything. You've said that. It may not be a very good deal, but it is a deal, and it's where we are. What would you actually do now? Not go back to the beginning, how you would have done it back then, but now.
Yeah. Well, but just bear in mind that my parents' generation voted in a referendum, and they were told it was a common market and it wouldn't be political. So there have been some pretty big lies told about all of this. Look, the fact is, the British people voted in a referendum for us to become an independent country, to leave the European Union, its institutions. Everybody on both sides of the debate said that meant leaving the EU, the single market and the customs union. And if that wasn't enough,
Nigel,
in
how would you do
2017, in a general election, 85% of us voted for parties saying to do very simple. We now, if we're going to honour the referendum result, we say to the European Union, we are leaving without a deal. We will get on with dealing with neighbourly issues such as transport, aeroplanes, but we'll leave on World Trade Organization rules. And you know something? If we do that, we will then have the upper hand in these negotiations, and they will then come back to us for a deal that is acceptable.
All right, Nigel.
The current one has to be scrapped.
Let's put that to Savin's cable, because, of course, there will be people up and down the country who will be outraged at the behaviour of the EU. As Nigel Farage has been saying, we've made concessions. We've made concessions. One time she needed something from them. They've rebutted that as well. Why not just leave?
Well, they shouldn't be outraged. They shouldn't be outraged. I mean, actually, I was in Brussels yesterday and I met several of the heads of government from the Liberal tradition, and they were falling over backwards to try and help Theresa May.
Doesn't sound like it, though.
No, well, they are trying to find some reassurance about the way in which the system will work. What they are saying is you've already negotiated an agreement. We've signed off on it, you've signed off on it. The text, the basic legal structure isn't going to be changed. So, I mean, that's been clear for some time.
What would you do, Savin?
Well, what I would do, what Theresa May must now do, actually, is to come back to Parliament and get us to vote on her agreement. Then we can start looking at other options.
But she knows the agreement won't go through. She knows it'll be fail.
Well, let's get that out of the way, and then we move for something for which there is now a clear
If you were Theresa May
momentum.
right now, and you were the Prime Minister and you had this deal, would you put it to the House, knowing that it was going to fail?
Well, the sensible thing for her to do, I think, would be accept reality, that it isn't going to get through, and to say, well, actually, I've done my best.
She has, though, hasn't she accepted that? Therefore, she's delayed the vote to try and find a way.
I've done my best to get a decent agreement. It certainly isn't, as Nigel Farage says, the worst in history, but it's a lot worse than what we've got at the moment. and to say OK, I'll go back to the country and offer them the choice between what I've negotiated and staying in the European Union.
You see, I think this sums up the situation, doesn't it? It's so difficult. Both of you, Nigel, have been campaigning for Brexit for 25 years now. You have always been a Remainer, would like to see a second referendum. I imagine are hoping that in that second referendum the country will vote Remain. You're both on opposing sides in that sense. You both think this is a bad deal. And isn't that why we've ended up with a bad deal? Because it's almost impossible to get the people who really want a Brexit and really want Remain to agree. She can't get that to happen.
No, I think actually the big mistake that was made, and it was made 2 years ago, was when she decided, through these so-called red lines, to take us out of the original common market. And as Nigel Farage says, his generation voted to join the common market. And by taking us out of the single market and the customs union, remember the single market was something Mrs Thatcher negotiated on our behalf.
That has caused the problem.
It was very
clear that people voted for to leave the single market.
Well, they didn't.
So she had to do that because she was honouring the referendum vote.
Well, that's how they've interpreted it. But if they'd wanted a sensible compromise could have been reached. But they've adopted this very extreme position, which was designed entirely to placate the right wing of the Conservative
Can you
Party.
explain? One of the things that Nigel's saying there is that right now we should just leave, deal with some of the more neighbourly things, transport, flights and such like, but go on WTO deals as things stand. Will you just explain to people that are at home sitting this morning saying that sounds reasonable? Do you know what? We're going to be...
It's wildly irresponsible.
Explain why that is for us.
Well, there is no such thing as a World Trade Organization. So the World Trade Organization, it sounds very sensible, but it's actually collapsing at the moment because Mr Trump has withdrawn all his judges from the panel who rule on legal cases.
So what would leaving with no deal do to the British economy?
Well, it would be chaotic. I mean, even if you dealt with the airlines and the medicines and this kind of thing, but all trade transactions would grind to a halt, and that's people's livelihoods.
OK, let's go back to Nigel Farage on that. I mean, we've got Sir Vince Cable here, very well respected in these economic matters, as you appreciate.
Sir Richard Branson earlier on the show.
Saying it could bankrupt the country, Nigel.
We really must stop this scaremongering rubbish. I mean, people like Vince Cable telling us 20 years ago, if we didn't join the euro, terrible things would happen to us. Thank goodness we didn't listen then. If we went today to Southampton or Felixstowe, we would see huge container ships coming in from China, those containers being loaded onto lorries and going out because many of us will buy our kids Christmas presents made in China. And all of that takes place on World Trade Organization rules. And you know something? We've just about had enough of being threatened all the time, told things would be worse for us. We were told a no vote in the referendum, a leave vote would lead to 500,000 jobs going immediately. We've had enough of all of this. The fact is, we have voted in the greatest democratic exercise in the history of our nation and backed up in a general election to leave the European Union. And to hear Vince Cable tell me he wants a referendum on Mrs May's deal, which isn't Brexit at all or Remain, well, frankly, I would boycott that referendum. This is complete dishonesty from our political class who are desperate to keep us being governed by a bunch of old men in Brussels. We voted for independence, and the Prime Minister, I honestly think that the Prime Minister needs to get out of the way, put somebody in charge who wants to honour that result.
There is undoubtedly a feeling from a lot of our viewers, Sir Vince, along the lines of what Nigel Farage is saying, which is, do you know what? We have voted once. We just want to get on with it, get the politicians to sort this out and get us out of here. Well,
they did vote by a narrow majority. And that's
but a majority
happened.
is a majority.
But we didn't know then what Brexit meant. And as you quite rightly said to Nigel Farage, all kind of promises were made about more money. The government, and not just the government, lots of independent people, now understand very clearly and have said, we will be poorer as a result of leaving. It seems perfectly reasonable, entirely democratic, to go back to people and say, well, now you know what Brexit is, the government's negotiated it, let's pass a judgment of whether that's what you really wanted. It's called informed consent. And if you were going through an operation at a hospital, you were asked, the doctor will ask you at the last moment, are you sure you really want to do this? And then they go ahead. And we're adopting exactly the same principle here.